The old pickup truck rattled down the long, familiar road, its tires kicking up a cloud of dust that shimmered in the late afternoon sun. For Captain Maya Johnson, every bump and groove in the asphalt was a memory. This was the road that led home to the small town of Harmony Creek, a place she hadn't seen in 2 long years. From the window, she watched the endless fields of corn and soybeans roll by, the landscape a patchwork of green and gold under a vast, blue sky. It was peaceful, almost painfully so. The quiet was a stark contrast to the world she had just left behind, a world of noise, chaos, and the constant thrumming hum of danger. Maya was a soldier, a captain in the United States Army, and she had spent the last 2 years on a deployment that had tested her in ways she never imagined. She was tough, disciplined, and respected by the men and women she led, but the uniform was packed away now, replaced by a simple pair of jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. To anyone who saw her, she was just another young woman, slender and unassuming, with watchful eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face, though youthful, held a certain weariness that she hoped wasn't too noticeable. As she pulled into the town square, a wave of nostalgia washed over her. Nothing had changed. The old brick courthouse still stood proudly in the center, its clock tower frozen at 3:30. Miller's Hardware, with its faded red awning, was still on the corner, and the sweet smell of baked bread wafted from Mrs. Gable's bakery. Harmony Creek was a town where time seemed to move a little slower, a place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as rare as a rainy day in July. For most, this was a comfort. For Maya, it felt like a cage. She parked the truck in front of the hardware store and took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut grass in summer. Her father, a kind, gentle man named Tom, had asked her to pick up a few things for him. He was a retired farmer who now spent his days tending to his garden and fixing things around the house. He worried about her constantly, his voice on their weekly phone calls always laced with a quiet anxiety she tried her best to soothe. Now, seeing the familiar storefront, she felt a pang of guilt. She had been so focused on her mission, on staying sharp and keeping her soldiers safe, that she hadn't truly considered how hard her absence had been on him. Pushing the thought aside, she swung the truck door open and stepped onto the sidewalk. The bell above the door of Miller's Hardware chimed as she entered, a sound that instantly transported her back to her childhood. The store smelled of sawdust, oil, and old wood, a scent she had always associated with her grandfather. Mr. Miller, a man with a kind, wrinkled face and a full head of white hair, looked up from behind the counter. "Well, I'll be," he said, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "Maya Johnson. Is that really you?" Maya offered a small smile. "It's me, Mr. Miller. It's good to see you. Good to see you, child. We've all been praying for your safe return. Your father is mighty proud of you, you know? Tells everyone in town about his daughter, the Army captain." A faint blush crept up Maya's neck. She wasn't used to the attention. In the Army, praise was earned through action, not words. Here, it felt different, more personal. "I'm just glad to be home," she said softly. "Dad needs some parts for the water pump. He gave me a list." She handed the crumpled piece of paper to Mr. Miller, who studied it through his bifocals. As he shuffled off toward the back aisles to find the items, the bell on the door chimed again. 3 young men swaggered in, their laughter loud and boisterous, filling the quiet space. Maya recognized them instantly. The one in the lead was Jed Thompson, the son of the wealthiest man in town. Jed had always been trouble, a boy who grew into a man who believed his father's money made him immune to rules and consequences. He was flanked by his 2 usual cronies, Billy and Ray, who seemed to exist only to echo his laughter and feed his ego. Jet's eyes landed on Maya, and a slow, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. She had learned to read people, to assess threats in a fraction of a second. She saw the entitlement in his posture, the cruelty in his eyes. He was a bully, plain and simple. Well, look what we have here," Jed said, his voice dripping with condescension. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. "If it isn't little Maya Johnson, heard you were off playing soldier. Did you get scared and come running home to Daddy?" Billy and Ray snickered behind him. Maya remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She kept her hands loose at her sides, her body relaxed but ready. Her training was a part of her now, an instinct that hummed just beneath the surface. She knew how to handle men like Jed. The key was to not give them the reaction they wanted. "I'm just here to pick up some things for my father, Jed," she said, her voice calm and even. Jed seemed disappointed by her lack of a response. He wanted a fight, a reaction, something to fuel his fragile pride. "Ah, that's cute. Still Daddy's little girl." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a mock whisper. "You know, a pretty little thing like you has no business playing with guns. He should be at home, learning to cook or something. Leave the tough stuff to the real men." The words were meant to sting, to provoke, and a part of her, the part that was tired and worn down from the long months of deployment, felt a flash of anger. She had seen real men, brave men, bleed and die. She had held their hands as they took their last breaths. She had earned her place, her rank, her respect, through sweat and grit and a strength Jed couldn't possibly comprehend. To him, she was just a pretty little thing. The ignorance of it was staggering, but she didn't let the anger show. She simply held his gaze, her eyes steady and unwavering. There was a coldness in her stare that seemed to finally get through to him. He faltered for a second, the smirk on his face tightening. He wasn't used to being looked at like that, as if he were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a fly to be swatted away. Whatever, he scoffed, trying to regain his composure. He turned to his friends. Let's get out of here. This place stinks of old people. As they turned to leave, Jed deliberately knocked into a display of paint cans near the door, sending them clattering to the floor. One of the lids popped off, and a splash of bright red paint splattered across the clean wooden floorboards. Jed and his friends laughed as if it were the funniest thing in the world, and walked out, letting the door slam shut behind them. Maya watched them go, her jaw tight. Mr. Miller came rushing back from the aisle, his face a mixture of anger and resignation. Darn kids, he muttered, looking at the mess. No respect at all. He started to bend down to clean it up, his old knees creaking in protest. No, Mr. Miller, let me, Maya said immediately. She knelt, grabbing some old rags from a nearby shelf. As she wiped up the thick red paint, she felt a familiar feeling settle in her stomach. It was the feeling of injustice, of seeing the strong prey on the weak. It was the very thing she had fought against for 2 years in a foreign land. She never expected to find it waiting for her right here, in the one place she was supposed to call home. The quiet of Harmony Creek suddenly felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of people being too afraid to speak up. And as she cleaned up the mess left by Jed Thompson, a quiet resolve began to form within her. She was home, but her fight, it seemed, was far from over. The next few days passed in a slow, quiet rhythm that was both comforting and unsettling for Maya. She spent her time with her father, helping him in the garden, fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, and listening to his stories about the town. Tom Johnson was a simple man with a big heart, and he was overjoyed to have his daughter home. He treated her as if she were still his little girl, the one he used to push on the swing in the backyard. He didn't ask about the war, about what she had seen or done. He was afraid of the answers, and Maya was grateful for his silence. She didn't have the words to describe the things that haunted her in the dead of night. She tried to reconnect with the town, to slip back into the life she had left behind. She went to the Sunday morning service at the local church, sitting in the same wooden pew she had occupied as a child. She saw old classmates, people she had grown up with. They smiled and said hello, but their eyes were filled with a mixture of curiosity and pity. They saw the uniform, not the person. They whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. She seemed so ... distant, one would say. I heard she was in some heavy combat, another would add. They treated her like a fragile object, a puzzle they couldn't solve. The feeling of being an outsider grew stronger each day. She felt a disconnect from these people, from their simple lives and their small-town concerns. Their biggest worry was whether the high school football team would win the championship. Her biggest worry had been whether her convoy would make it through the next village without hitting an IED. The gap between their worlds felt 1,000,000 miles wide. One afternoon, she was walking down Main Street when she saw Jed Thompson and his friends again. They were loitering outside the old movie theater, which had been closed for years. This time, they were harassing Mr. Henderson, the elderly owner of the town's only bookstore. Mr. Henderson was a frail man with glasses as thick as bottle caps and a gentle soul. He was trying to sweep the sidewalk in front of his shop, and Jed's group was deliberately kicking leaves back onto the area he had just cleaned. Having trouble there, old man? Jed taunted, a cruel grin on his face. Maybe you're getting too old for this. You should just sell this dusty old place and retire. Mr. Henderson's hands trembled slightly as he held the broom. Please, boys, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Just leave me be. What's that? We can't hear you. Grandpa Ray chimed in, kicking a larger pile of debris right in front of the bookstore's entrance. Maya felt that familiar anger rise within her. She watched from across the street, her muscles tensing. Her first instinct was to march over there and put an end to it. She knew she could. It would be easy. But she hesitated. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. She wasn't in a combat zone. This was Harmony Creek. Acting on her instincts here would have consequences. It would cause a scene, create more gossip, and upset her father. So she held back her frustration, a bitter taste in her mouth. After a few more minutes of tormenting, the old man Jed and his crew grew bored and moved on, their laughter echoing down the empty street. Maya waited until they were gone before she crossed the road. Mr. Henderson was leaning heavily on his broom, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked tired and defeated. Mr. Henderson, Maya said gently, are you all right? He looked up, startled. Oh, Maya, yes, I'm fine. Just some boys with too much time on their hands. Let me help you with that, she said, taking the broom from his trembling hands. She quickly and efficiently swept the sidewalk clean, her movements precise and economical. Thank you, dear, Mr. Henderson said, watching her. You're a good girl. Your father raised you right. He sighed, looking down the street where Jed had disappeared. It's that Thompson boy. He thinks he can do whatever he wants because of his father's money. No one dares to stand up to him. What about the sheriff? Maya asked, leaning the broom against the wall. Mr. Henderson gave a sad little shrug. Sheriff Brody is a good man, but he's overwhelmed. He's getting close to retirement. Jed's father, Mr. Thompson, is a very influential man in this town. He's on the town council, donates to everything. Brody doesn't want to make waves. Maya nodded slowly, processing the information. It was a classic case of small-town politics, of power and influence, silencing justice. She helped Mr. Henderson back into his bookstore, the air inside smelling of old paper and leather. It was a quiet sanctuary, a world away from the ugliness outside. They do this often, she asked. A few times a week, he admitted, sinking into a worn armchair behind his desk. They knock over displays, bother my customers. I've lost business because of them. But what can I do? I call Sheriff Brody. He comes and gives them a talking to, and they're back the next day. Maya looked around the cozy little shop, at the shelves packed with books, each one a story waiting to be told. This store was Mr. Henderson's life's work, his passion, and it was being threatened by a spoiled brat and his followers. The injustice of it all settled deep in her bones. She spent the rest of the afternoon helping Mr. Henderson organize his shelves, the repetitive task calming her nerves. They talked about books, about the history of the town, about everything except the war. It was a relief to just be a person, not a soldier, for a few hours. But as she walked home that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the street, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The town's quiet was a lie. Beneath the surface of Harmony Creek, there was a current of fear and intimidation. Jed Thompson was more than just a bully. He was a symptom of a larger problem. People were afraid to speak out, and the law was turning a blind eye. Her training had taught her to identify threats, to analyze patterns, and to anticipate an enemy's next move. And everything she was seeing told her that Jed's behavior was escalating. Kicking leaves and taunting an old man was one thing, but the aggression, the arrogance, the complete disregard for others, it was a dangerous combination. It was only a matter of time before he crossed a line from which there was no coming back. And Maya found herself wondering what she would do when that day came. She had come home seeking peace, but it seemed that peace was something she would have to fight for, even here. In the week that followed, Maya's unease grew into a quiet certainty. She was trained to see things that others missed, to notice the small details that formed a larger, more dangerous picture. And the picture forming in Harmony Creek was troubling. She started paying closer attention, her senses on high alert, just as they would have been on patrol outside the wire. She noticed a new car in town, a black sedan with tinted windows that didn't belong. It would park for hours on a side street, always near the old abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. She saw it late one night when she couldn't sleep, the glow of a cigarette visible in the driver's seat. The next day, she saw Jed Thompson talking to the man from the car. The man was older, with a hard face and cold eyes that reminded her of the insurgents she had dealt with overseas. He was not from Harmony Creek. The way he carried himself, the way he scanned his spoke of a life lived on the wrong side of the law. Maya's instincts, honed by years of survival, were screaming at her. This was more than just a rich kid causing trouble. Jed was in over his head. She started a new routine. Every morning before the sun came up, she would go for a long run, her path deliberately taking her past the warehouse. She would see tire tracks in the dirt, fresh ones from the night before. She saw discarded cigarette butts, a brand she didn't recognize. Small things, but they were pieces of a puzzle. Her father noticed the change in her. "You're up early," he said one morning, as she came back, her face beaded with sweat. "Everything okay, honey?" "Everything's fine, Dad," she lied, forcing a smile, "just trying to stay in shape." He looked at her, his eyes full of a father's worry. He knew she was hiding something, but he didn't push. He just nodded and handed her a glass of water. Maya decided she couldn't just sit back and watch. She had to do something. She went to see Sheriff Brody. The sheriff's office was a small, cramped space in the courthouse basement. It smelled of stale coffee and paperwork. Sheriff Brody, a large man with a weary face and a uniform that was a little too tight around the middle, looked up from his desk in surprise. "Maya," he said, a hint of caution in his voice. "What can I do for you?" She stood before his desk, her posture straight, her gaze direct. "Sheriff, I have some concerns about Jed Thompson." Brody sighed, leaning back in his chair, which groaned in protest. "Look, I know he can be a handful. I've talked to him, and I've talked to his father. He's just a kid blowing off steam." "With all due respect, Sheriff, I don't think that's all it is," Maya said, her voice firm but respectful. "I've seen him meeting with some unsavory characters, men who aren't from around here. There's a black sedan that's been parked near the old warehouse. I think something illegal is going on." Sheriff Brody rubbed his tired eyes. "Maya, you've been through a lot. Sometimes, when you come back from over there, you see danger everywhere. It's normal. But Harmony Creek is a quiet town. The biggest crime we've had in the last year was Mrs. Gable's prize-winning pumpkin being stolen from her porch." His condescension was a slap in the face. He was dismissing her, treating her like a hysterical woman, like a damaged soldier who couldn't tell the difference between a real threat and a shadow. "Sheriff, My training taught me to recognize threats, she said, her voice dropping, becoming colder. And Jed Thompson and the men he's meeting with are a threat to this town. And my job is to be the sheriff of this town, he retorted, his patience clearly wearing thin. I appreciate your concern, I really do. But you're a civilian now. Leave the police work to us, little lady. The phrase little lady hit her like a physical blow. It was the same dismissive, patronizing tone Jed had used. In that moment, she saw that Sheriff Brody was part of the problem. He was either too complacent, too intimidated by the Thompson family's influence, or too blind to see what was happening right under his nose. She knew there was no point in arguing further. She had presented her concerns, and he had brushed them aside. All right, Sheriff, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Thank you for your time. She turned and walked out of the office, her back ramrod straight. The injustice of it burned in her chest. She had offered her help, her expertise, and had been patted on the head and told to run along. She was alone in this. That night, her frustration kept her awake. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the quiet country night, seeming to mock her. She thought about her soldiers, about the trust they had placed in her. They had trusted her to lead them, to protect them, to make the right calls. And now, the people of her own hometown were in danger. And the one person who was supposed to protect them was doing nothing. She got out of bed and walked to her window, looking out at the moonlit fields. She couldn't shake the feeling that a clock was ticking, that something bad was about to happen. Jed was getting more brazen, and the presence of the outsiders meant the stakes were getting higher. Bullies like Jed, when they got in trouble, didn't just admit defeat. They doubled down. They did something stupid, something desperate. She made a decision. If the law wouldn't act, she would have to be prepared. She wouldn't intervene unless she had to, but she wouldn't be caught off guard. She would continue to watch, to gather information. She would be the silent guardian that Harmony Creek didn't know it needed. She went to the old wooden chest at the foot of her bed. She hadn't opened it since she got home. Inside, beneath her neatly folded dress blues, was her service pistol disassembled and cleaned. It was a tool of her trade, a part of her old life that she had hoped to leave behind. But as she looked at it, she knew that sometimes, to find peace, you first had to be ready for war. She didn't reassemble the weapon. She didn't need to. Her hands, her mind, her body, those were her real weapons. And they were always ready. The storm was coming to Harmony Creek, and she would be ready to face it. Friday night in Harmony Creek meant one thing. The Greasy Spoon Diner was packed. It was the heart of the town, a place of worn vinyl booths, chrome fixtures, and the comforting smell of coffee and fried onions. The jukebox in the corner played old rock and roll hits, and the air buzzed with conversation and laughter. Maya was there, sitting in a booth with her father. It was the first time she had felt something close to relaxed since she'd been home. Her father was telling a long, rambling story about a fishing trip from years ago, and for a moment, she let the familiar sounds of the diner wash over her. Pushing the tension from her mind, she was facing the door, a habit she couldn't break. Every person who walked in got a quick, automatic assessment. It was part of her like breathing, so when the door flew open with a violent crash, she was the first to react. 3 figures burst in, their faces hidden by dark ski masks. They were all holding guns. The cheerful chatter of the diner died instantly, replaced by a collective gasp of fear. The air crackled with sudden, terrifying silence, broken only by the tinny sound of the jukebox, which continued to play a cheerful love song. Nobody move. The leader shouted, his voice muffled by the mask but sharp with a desperate nervous energy. Maya recognized immediately. It was Jed Thompson. Even with the mask, she knew his posture, the arrogant way he held his shoulders. The other 2 were Billy and Ray, smaller and clearly terrified, their guns trembling in their hands. Panic erupted. A woman screamed. People dove under tables. A plate clattered to the floor and shattered. Maya's father grabbed her arm, his face pale with shock. Maya, get down, he whispered urgently. But Maya didn't get down. Her body went into a state of heightened awareness. She knew all too well. The world seemed to slow down. The noise of the diner faded into a dull roar. Her focus narrowed, her mind becoming a cold, clear machine of analysis and action. She saw everything. The position of the 3 men, the types of weapons they held to pistols. 1, a shotgun, held by Billy. The layout of the room, the locations of the exits, the terrified faces of her neighbors. Jed pointed his gun at Sally, a young waitress who couldn't have been more than 18. She was frozen in place, a coffee pot still in her hand. The cash register, open it now, Jed yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. Billy, the one with the shotgun, was supposed to be watching the crowd, but he was distracted, his head darting back and forth. Ray was standing near the door, looking like he was about to be sick. They were amateurs, dangerous, unpredictable amateurs. That made them even more of a threat. Maya knew she had to act. Waiting for the police wasn't an option. Sheriff Brody's office was 10 minutes away on a good day. In 10 minutes, someone could get killed. She looked at her father. Dad, stay down and do not get up. No matter what, she said, her voice low and calm. A commander's voice. He looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. but he saw the look on her face, the absolute focus. The lack of hesitation, and he nodded, ducking his head below the table. Maya slid out of the booth, keeping her body low. She moved silently, using the chaos and the overturned tables as cover. Jed was still focused on the terrified waitress. Billy was trying to watch the room, but his eyes kept flicking back to the register. Ray was useless, a statue of fear by the door. The path was clear. She had about 15 feet of open space to cross to get to the first target, Billy and his shotgun. The shotgun was the biggest threat to the room. It had to be neutralized first. She took a deep breath, and then she moved it. It wasn't a run. It was an explosion of controlled, purposeful motion. She covered the distance in a blur. Billy saw her at the last second, his eyes widening in his mask. He tried to swing the shotgun toward her, but he was too slow. His movements clumsy with panic. Maya didn't go for the gun. She went for him. She slammed her shoulder into his chest, driving him backward. The shotgun fired, the blast deafening in the enclosed space, tearing a hole in the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Before Billy could recover, Maya's hand shot out, her fingers finding the nerve cluster where his neck met his shoulder. She squeezed. It was a move designed to cause immediate, debilitating pain and muscle failure. Billy yelped, his body going limp, and the shotgun clattered to the floor. Maya kicked it under a booth, out of reach. One down. Jed spun around at the sound of the blast, his gun swinging toward the commotion. Billy, what the? He saw Maya standing over his fallen friend. For a split second, his mind couldn't process it. He saw the pretty little thing from the hardware store. It didn't make sense. That hesitation was his mistake. Maya was already moving toward the second target, Ray, by the door. She needed to cut off their escape and secure the entrance. She moved in a low crouch, a phantom gliding through the chaos. Ray saw her coming and fumbled with his pistol, trying to aim. He was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. Maya didn't slow down. As he finally raised the gun, she dropped to the floor, sweeping her leg out and hooking his ankle. He went down hard, his head hitting the tile with a sickening thud. The pistol flew from his grasp and skidded across the floor, coming to a stop near the jukebox. 2 down. Now, it was just Jed. He stood in the middle of the diner, his pistol wavering between the waitress and Maya. He was completely rattled. His plan had fallen apart in less than 10 seconds. Don't move, he screamed, his voice hyped. With panic, he grabbed the waitress, Sally, and pulled her in front of him, using her as a human shield. Her body trembled with sobs. Maya rose to her feet, her hands held out in a non-threatening gesture. She stood between Jed and the rest of the diners, her body a shield for them. Let her go, Jed, she said, her voice as cold and steady as ice. Stay back, I'll shoot her, I swear I will, he shrieked, pressing the muzzle of the gun to Sally's temple. You don't want to do that, Maya said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. You're in enough trouble already, don't make it worse. Shut up, you don't know anything. I know you're scared, Jed, she said, her eyes locked on his. She needed to keep him talking, to keep his focus on her. I know this isn't what you wanted. You don't know me. I know you're in debt to some very dangerous people, she said, taking another step. I know you're desperate, but this isn't the way. Her words hit their mark. Jed's eyes, visible through the holes in his mask, widened in shock. How could she'll know that? His grip on the waitress loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Maya needed in one fluid motion. She closed the distance. Her left hand shot out and clamped down on his wrist, twisting it outward with brutal efficiency. His fingers spasmed open, and the gun fell. Her right hand grabbed the front of his shirt, and she used his own momentum to spin him around and slam him face first into the counter. His head hit the chrome edge, and he grunted in pain. She wrenched his arm up behind his back in a compliance hold that made him cry out. The entire diner was silent. The only sound, the ragged, terrified sobs of the waitress and Yet's pained whimpers. Maya held him there, her knee pressed firmly into his back, her grip like iron. The whole thing, from the moment she left her booth to the moment she had Jed pinned, had taken less than 30 seconds. The diner patrons slowly began to peek out from under their tables. They stared, their faces a mixture of disbelief, shock, and awe. They saw the 3 armed men, all neutralized, and they saw the person who had done it, not a police officer, not a man, but Maya Johnson, the quiet girl they thought was just a civilian. Her father slowly stood up from their booth, his face ashen. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see the little girl he used to push on a swing. He saw a warrior. Just then, the wail of a siren grew louder, and the flashing red and blue lights washed over the diner's windows. Sheriff Brody burst through the door, his gun drawn, expecting to find a hostage situation. Instead, he found a scene of absolute stillness. He saw Billy groaning on the floor, Ray unconscious by the door, and Jed Thompson pinned to the counter by the very little lady he had dismissed just days before. His jaw dropped, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible reality before him. The storm had broken, and it had been met not by the law, but by a lone, quiet soldier who had just saved them all. The aftermath was a whirlwind of flashing lights, crackling radios, and the low murmur of shocked voices. Paramedics tended to Billy and Ray, while Sheriff Brody, his face a mask of stunned disbelief, slapped handcuffs on a whimpering Jed Thompson. The patrons of the diner, wrapped in blankets provided by the emergency services, gave their statements one by one, each story painting the same incredible picture. They spoke of the terrifying chaos, and then of the sudden, shocking efficiency of Maya's actions. Maya herself stood quietly to the side, her father's arm wrapped around her shoulders. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She felt the eyes of the town on her. The whispers were different now. The pity and curiosity had been replaced by awe and a little bit of fear. She was no longer just Tom Johnson's quiet daughter. She was something else, something they didn't understand. Sheriff Brody approached her, his hat in his hands. He looked humbled, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Maya," he began, his voice raspy, I don't know what to say. You saved people's lives tonight. I was wrong. I was so wrong to dismiss you." "It's all right, Sheriff," Maya said, her voice flat. "I just did what needed to be done." "No, it's not all right," he insisted, shaking his head. "I should have listened. You tried to warn me." He looked over at Jed, who was being put into the back of a squad car. "I always saw him as just a punk kid. I never thought he'd do something like this." Before Maya could respond, a sleek, expensive car pulled up, screeching to a halt behind the ambulance. The door opened and a tall, imposing man in a tailored suit stepped out. It was Richard Thompson, Jed's father. He was the most powerful man in Harmony Creek, a man used to getting his way. He strode onto the scene like he owned it, his face a thunderous scowl. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his eyes locking on his son in the back of the police car. "Sheriff, what have you done?" "Richard," Brody said, his demeanor shifting slightly, a hint of his old deference creeping back in. "Jed and two others, they tried to rob the diner. They were armed." Thompson's cold eyes swept over the scene, dismissing the terrified patrons and the damaged diner. His gaze landed on Maya. "And who is this?" he demanded, his tone dripping with disdain. "This is Maya Johnson," Brody said. "She was the one who stopped them." Thompson looked Maya up and down, his expression one of utter contempt. "Her? She's just a girl." He turned back to the sheriff, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial, commanding tone. "Listen to me, Brody. This is a misunderstanding. My son, he's a good boy. He's been under a lot of stress. He made a stupid mistake, that's all. This doesn't need to become a big legal mess." Maya watched the exchange, a cold knot forming in her stomach. She had seen this before too. Power and influence, trying to bend the law, to erase the truth. A mistake? Mr. Henderson, the bookstore owner, who had been in the diner, stepped forward, his voice trembling but firm. He pointed a gun at a young girl's head. "Richard, that's not a mistake. That's a crime." Thompson shot him a look that could curdle milk. "You stay out of this, Henderson. This is a family matter." He turned his attention back to the sheriff. "We can handle this quietly. I'll pay for any damages. I'll make sure the boy gets some ... counseling. There's no need to press charges." "Sheriff," Brody hesitated. Maya could see the conflict on his face. He was a public servant, sworn to uphold the law, but he was also a man who knew where the power in Harmony Creek lay. Richard Thompson could make his life very difficult. He could threaten his budget, his job, his pension. "Richard, it's not that simple," Brody said weakly. "There are witnesses here. He discharged a firearm. People could have been killed, but they weren't, were they?" Thompson shot back, taking a step closer to the sheriff. "Thanks to her," he said, gesturing at Maya with a flick of his wrist. "So no harm, no foul. Let's all just calm down and be reasonable." He then looked directly at Maya, his eyes like chips of ice. "You'll be compensated for your ... trouble, of course. I'm sure we can come to a very generous arrangement to make sure you don't feel the need to make this a bigger deal than it is." The offer of a bribe, so blatant and arrogant, was the final straw. Maya stepped forward, placing herself between Thompson and the sheriff. She was shorter than Thompson, smaller in every way, but she stood with an unshakable stillness that made the powerful man take an involuntary step back. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that cut through the night air. "Your son didn't just make a mistake. He terrorized an entire room full of people. He threatened to kill an innocent girl. That isn't something your money can fix, and I don't want your money." Thompson was taken aback, unused to being spoken to in such a direct manner. "And who do you think you are?" he sneered. "I'm a citizen of this town," she said, "and I'm a witness, and I will testify in court to exactly what I saw tonight." She then looked at Sheriff Brody, her gaze unwavering. "And I expect you to do your duty, Sheriff. I expect you to charge him with armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and every other crime he committed tonight, no matter who his father is." Her words hung in the air, a direct challenge to the unspoken power structure of Harmony Creek. The other witnesses, who had been silent and fearful, seemed to draw strength from her. One by one, they started to speak up. "She's right, Sheriff," said Mrs. Gable. "He almost shot Sally. We'll all testify." Another man shouted from the crowd. The tide had turned. The fear that had kept people silent for so long was being washed away by a wave of collective courage. sparked by one person's refusal to back down. Sheriff Brody looked from Maya to the determined faces of the townspeople, and then to the furious face of Richard Thompson. In that moment, he made a choice. He stood up straighter, his shoulders squaring. The weary, overwhelmed man was gone, replaced by a lawman who remembered his oath. "Richard," he said, his voice firm and clear, "your son is under arrest. He has the right to an attorney, but he will be processed and charged according to the law, just like anyone else." Richard Thompson stared at him, his face turning a dark shade of red. He looked at Maya, his eyes burning with a cold, hateful promise of retribution. He knew he had lost this battle, but his expression made it clear that he believed the war was far from over. He spun on his heel, got back in his expensive car, and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and an unspoken threat hanging in the air. Maya watched him go, knowing this was only the beginning. She had stopped a robbery, but she had also made a very powerful enemy. Justice had won the night, but she had a feeling that keeping it would be a whole new kind of fight. The days following the diner incident were unlike any Maya had ever experienced in Harmony Creek. She was no longer an object of pity or a strange outsider. She was a hero. People stopped her on the street, not to whisper about her, but to thank her. Mr. Henderson gave her free books for life. Mrs. Gable baked her a special apple pie. The town, which had once felt so alienating, now embraced her. But beneath the surface of gratitude, there was a current of fear. Everyone knew that Richard Thompson was not a man who forgave a public humiliation. The pressure on Sheriff Brody was immense. Thompson's lawyers were filing motions, claiming Jed was the victim of an unstable, violent veteran, and that the entire event was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. They were trying to paint Maya as the aggressor, a trained killer, who had overreacted. The local newspaper, owned by a company in which Thompson was a major shareholder, began printing subtle articles questioning the events of that night, hinting at Maya's psychological state after her deployment. Maya saw the strategy for what it was, an attempt to discredit the witness, to poison the well before the case ever went to trial. She knew that Thompson's power and money could easily bury the truth. Sheriff Brody was doing his best, but he was outmatched by the high-priced legal team from the city. Justice, she realized, was not guaranteed. It had to be secured, she remembered. The black sedan, the man with the cold eyes, and her conversation with Sheriff Brody that he had so easily dismissed. She had told him Jed was involved in something bigger, and now she was certain of it. The diner robbery wasn't just a stupid mistake, it was an act of pure desperation. Jed needed money, and he needed it fast. The question was, why? Maya decided to do what she did best, gather intelligence. She started her early morning runs again, but this time with a specific purpose. She went back to the old warehouse, looking for anything she might have missed. In the dirt near the back entrance, half hidden under a bush, she found it. A small, disposable cell phone. It was cracked and dead, but it was a lead. She took the phone to a tech-savvy army buddy she knew from her last tour who lived a few towns over. "Can you get anything off this?" she asked. "Give me a day," he said with a grin. No piece of tech stays dead forever. While he worked, Maya made a quiet visit to Mr. Henderson at the bookstore. "You said Jed was bothering your customers?" she said. Did you notice him talking to anyone in particular? Anyone who didn't seem like they were from around here? Mr. Henderson thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. "You know," he said slowly, "there was one man, he came in a few times, never bought a book. He just sat in the back and waited. Jed would come in, they'd talk in low voices, and then leave. The man ... he gave me a bad feeling. Drove a black car. The pieces were clicking into place." The next day, her army buddy called. "Bingo," he said. "I got the data. The phone is a burner, but I recovered the call logs and some text messages from the last few weeks. It's all one number. And the texts ... Maya, this kid was in deep. He was moving. Illicit goods, something to do with stolen electronics, for a crew out of the city. Looks like he lost a shipment, and they wanted their money back, to the tune of $50,000. The last few texts are threats. They gave him a deadline. The deadline was last Saturday, the day after the diner robbery. Maya now had the full picture. Jed wasn't just a bully. He was a small-time criminal who had gotten in way over his head with a professional crew. The robbery was his last, desperate attempt to get the money he owed them. But there was one more piece that didn't fit. How did a spoiled rich kid like Jed get involved in something like this in the first place? And then she remembered the look on Richard Thompson's face, the way he had tried to control the situation, the way he had tried to buy her silence. It wasn't just a father protecting his son. It was something more. She took the information from the phone, the call logs, the threatening text messages, the number of the man from the city, and she didn't go to Sheriff Brody. Not yet. She knew this had to be handled perfectly, with no room for Thompson's lawyers to twist it. She made a copy of everything and sent one package to the state police, and another to a reporter she knew at a major regional newspaper, someone far beyond Richard Thompson's sphere of influence. The story broke 2 days later. It was front-page news. Local businessman's son linked to organized crime ring. The article detailed the threats, the debt, and the botched robbery. The state police? now involved, moved quickly. They arrested the man with the cold eyes and several members of his crew in the city. But the biggest bombshell was yet to come. When the police investigated the finances of the Thompson family, they uncovered the final, shocking twist. Richard Thompson's business empire was failing. He had made a series of bad investments and was on the verge of bankruptcy. He wasn't just covering for his son. He had been a silent partner in the entire operation. He had used Jed's small-time criminal enterprise as a way to launder money and try to save his failing businesses. He had pushed his own son into a world of danger to cover his own tracks. The house of cards collapsed. Richard and Jed Thompson were both arrested, their faces on every news channel. The power they had held over Harmony Creek for so long vanished. Overnight, a week later, Maya was sitting on her father's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The town was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a true, peaceful quiet, born not of fear, but of relief. Sheriff Brody's patrol car pulled into the driveway. He got out and walked up the steps, holding a small, clumsily wrapped box. "This is for you," he said, handing it to her. "From everyone at the station, it's not much." Inside was a simple plaque. It read, "To Captain Maya Johnson, for reminding us what courage and integrity look like. With deepest thanks, the Harmony Creek Sheriff's Department." Maya looked at it, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said. "This means a lot." "No, thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You came back and you made this town better. You made me a better lawman." He paused. "We're starting a new community watch program, and we're looking for someone to help with training, someone who knows what they're doing." He looked at her, his eyes full of hope. Maya looked out at the fields of her childhood, at the town that was finally living up to its name. She had come home looking for peace, and had found a new kind of war, but she had won. She had fought for justice and restored the harmony that had been broken, and in doing so, she had finally found what she had been looking for all along. "I think," she said, the smile growing wider, "I think I'd like that, very much." She had found her new mission. She was home.